Hello and welcome to the Cynic Weekly on Thursday the 21st of August 2025. I'm your host Barry Gallagher and as always I'm joined by Stuart Dugan. Stuart, how are you, all things considered?
All things considered, Barry, I am fine. Obviously annoyed, which we will get into. But in almost like, that sicko meme, I'm almost looking forward to it in a quiet way. I think there's a lot to pick through. And not like, oh, it'll be cathartic to talk about it. I just think it's a lot of finger pointing to do, and I like pointing a finger.
Yes, indeed. And we're also joined by Scott Fleming. Scott, how's things with you?
I not great for obvious reasons. I was out watching it last night and I came home sort of borderline steaming, and then did that thing where you wake up at like 5 in the morning for some reason and can't get back to sleep. So I've been in a bit of a bastard mood all day because of that. But in a way, I think it's perfect preparation for the tone of this podcast.
Yep, sounds spot on as well. Yeah, weird. I never had a drink last night, but I feel really hungover today, and I don't know if it's just the headache that is supporting Celtic right now. And we've got lots of listeners' questions, and just saying before we came on air there, this pod tonight might be a wee bit all over the place, but that will reflect life imitating art for the football club that we all love. But yeah, Stuart, I'll come to you first. The opening question is not really. Well, I suppose it'll lead into where things go, but it was mad thinking about this morning that prior to last night, Celtic's previous European result was a one each draw in the Allianz in Munich, and it was very nearly a 1-0 victory. And that feels like a million miles away from last night's 0-0 with Kairat. So I'm going to give you the unenviable task of telling me where it's all gone wrong.
Well, it's simple, but no, it's not simple. It's many things. I think so. Obviously, it's a good point of comparison just from a European perspective, but also how many really good performances have Celtic had since that Bayern game? There were some. Let's not be completely revisionist about it, but you are talking about a handful, and that's really alarming. I think that I did say there's a lot of finger pointing to go on tonight, and a lot of blame to go around for the situation at Celtic. But if you look at the team that played at the Allianz and just the squad in general, the squad that night had issues. There were big issues with that and things that needed to be addressed in the summer, but you were getting the absolute best out of what you had, and you had a good squad. But in terms of competing at that level, you can't, for example, go in with Liam Scales as your centre half. And I know that Austin Trusty played that night, but Trusty over a period of a season has proven not really to be that guy and has too much mistake in him, and the managers prefer to go back to Liam Scales. Fine. So that's an area that you need to address. We were coasting along with one left back. I know Jeffrey Schlupp played that night. It was a very short-term deal. It was one of his only kind of highlights when he was at the club. That is a problem that has been there for years. At that point, we'd sold our star striker. That needed to be replaced. So these were the bits of business that were required to be done in order to be competitive at a European level. And you would look at that and go, we'll probably lose one or two in the summer, but it's minor surgery. And if you look at the squad last night and the team that started, there are so many problems with it that the fact that Liam Scales was starting at centre half was like, right, that's fine. We've got other fires that need to be addressed before that. Like, you've got a completely, we'll talk about him later, but just a completely dysfunctional member of the team in Adam Ida, where you're almost like, it's genuinely like being down to 10 men. And also, when we get to a portion and blame otherwise, it's completely affecting how the team play. Like, the team is not functioning properly because at the very top of the pitch, you don't have an option. There's nothing that you can really do with that. You've then got a left back who we know can't play much more than 60 or 70 minutes. You've got a right back that you really hope doesn't get injured, because we have a reserve who's very, gives us all, but we know that he's not of a quality. So hopefully nothing bad happens to him in this game. I know he's not had a pre-season, so I'm sure his hamstrings will be great. They'll be fine. You then you're relying on an absolute veteran, one of the greatest ever Celts, but a player who's in the twilight of his career, to be the one that kind of goes and does it all for you. Again, knowing that he can't play 90 minutes. And you have the only kind of real noteworthy new signing is a 1.7 million acquisition, who has looked really positive, but has also now put in two very poor performances. and that's alarming. And then your best player from last season hasn't really kicked the ball since, let's be honest, into the split probably last year. Haven't really seen much from Dyson Maeda. So it's a fucking disaster. And the performance, I think that a lot of people would suggest you should have the quality at your disposal to beat a team like Kairat. I absolutely will not argue with that. I think that the players deserve everything that will come at their way. I think the manager does as well. But fundamentally, the issue is just sheer negligence on behalf of the Celtic board. I think that there's so much been said and done, and sorry, I know I'm going quite long here, but so much said and done with the off the pitch stuff. But just from an on the pitch perspective, to answer your question, it's complete negligence from the Celtic board, and it's the culmination of years and years of negligence and things becoming the norm, like waiting till the last week of the transfer window to do your business, and penny pinching and selling your best players and not replacing them, and it's kind of all the chickens coming home to roost, and it's an absolute mess. And yeah, plenty to unpick from there, but that's a few starting points for you.
Yeah, just before I bring Scott in, just as you were kind of talking about the kind of lack of squad depth, I saw something online earlier that we had two different centre-back partnerships last night. We had two different left-backs, two different right-backs, three different right-wingers, two different left-wingers, and three different strikers. And that's not even talking about the changes in midfield, which are natural. Scott, that amount of chopping and changing shows that the manager is having to sort of, I was going to say work miracles, but the miracles aren't happening because things are so poor. And we'll probably come on to that the manager has to take some blame as well. But ultimately, I think good players win football matches, and if you take your good players away, you see the decline from the Allianz to last night in a nutshell.
Yeah, and when I think back to that Bayern game, like, I'm probably the Celtic fan equivalent of like Michael Fish, like telling everyone the storm isn't coming. Like, I remember last March, April, saying to people when I spoke about it, just that it was nothing to worry about and some element of drop off was natural. And I wasn't too, even though you could see that we were suddenly struggling so badly to break teams down and bringing Liam Scales back into the team, and all the sort of warning signs were there, I thought it would be all right as long as we get the treble over the line. And then as soon as we didn't beat Aberdeen in the cup final, I think I said it on this podcast actually, the one tiny positive I took from it was, at least now this means that we can't ignore the blatant problems here. Like, on a board level, we can't ignore the obvious reinforcements that have to be made in nearly every area of the team. And on a coaching tactical level, we can't ignore just how much we've ran out of ideas and how one-dimensional and one-paced we've become. And since then, we basically have done exactly that and ignored it all and just hoped that we would just muddle our way through. I think Paul Calvin talked about it in the reaction last night. He was talking about the idea of sort of staring into the precipice. And the depressing thing about it is we've all known that precipice is there all summer. And we've just done nothing to avoid it. And we got the luckiest possible draw. I did a bit of research on Kairat today. I probably should have done it before the game, but I'm pretty sure they've never played a group stage campaign in the Champions League or Europa League. They've had one Conference League campaign and they got 2 points, and it was 4 or 5 years ago. You know, like that. This is a really, really limited team. Of all the teams still left in the qualifying phase at this stage, they're clearly the worst one. And yet we've now put ourselves in a situation of serious jeopardy against them. And if, obviously, I hope that we sort of pull it out of the fire next week over there. But if we don't, I think it's right up there with Cluj, Ferencváros, Media Bratislava, like anything you could mention of the worst disasters we've had in the Champions League over the years.
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue with that. And we'll come on and talk about, well, I don't really want to talk about the game in much depth because there really isn't much to talk about, but we'll kind of focus on last night. But just we've had a lot of questions and comments in from listeners, so I'll just kind of run through some of them just now. So Tommy said, this is what happens when you continually underfund the first team. Dale, we need to protest against the board. Those conservative cowards are killing the club. I'm so angry that I'm already done with this season. We've got, let's see, I hate, Ronan says, I hate this bowling club board as much as Rangers, but at least I get to laugh at Rangers more other than not. A half-decent striker and 2 quality wingers, and we iron this team out. Beyond negligent. At least sack the board. We're loud and clear to make it through to TV. P.S. I say this in the most measured, level-headed way as possible. I wouldn't watch another game either starts for us. Stuart, just to sort of kind of look at the sort of woeful performance, and I don't think anyone stunk the place out as much as Adam Ida. I think on here we've been fairly fair with him and given him probably a lot more leeway than a lot of other people have, or haven't, sorry. But Ida last night just kind of, he's your 9 million signing from last summer. And that potentially is his worst performance, I think, in a Celtic jersey, and he's got quite a catalogue to choose from.
Yeah, I think, you're right. I've always talked about him as a player like Adam Ida can be a really good addition, a really good second striker if he's going to chip in with 20 goals a season from limited minutes and be trusted to start domestically. Obviously, we've overpaid for him, but he can be a valued member of the squad. He has been so bad this season, so bad, and probably worse than his level, but just completely, as you say, stinking up the place. And I think that I'm actually at the point now where I think it's past the point of no return, certainly in the court of public opinion, but I think the manager probably thinks that now. I'm not sure, there was so many fucking breaks in play last night, but one of them, the cameras cut to Rodgers just giving him an absolute roasting when there was an injury break, just desperately trying to get him to, you need to move to the ball, you need to do this. You saw his teammates doing the same, like desperately looking for an option. And also just in comparison when Maeda came on, when Maeda switched into the middle, just the simple things that are required to do, just take the ball in, pass it off, get moving, like do that quickly. It doesn't have to be take the ball in, take 6 touches, fall to the ground, try and win a battle, nothing, just literally be a conduit to get play moving in the final third, and he's incapable of doing that. And I think that it's a complicated thing when you're talking about who's to blame for this, that and the other. I think that I feel it's not a nice thing to say. I feel really sorry for Brendan Rodgers because I think he's just been fucking done like an absolute kipper, where we can talk about his comments and stuff like that, but when he said there's only so many ways that I can dress it up, or whatever his quote was about, like, he's been asked week on week for 6 to 8 weeks about transfers. He's been pretty robust in his comments, way quicker than he normally is. I'm sure there are a lot of fans that would like him to go full scorched earth. And essentially he's just kind of hung out to dry, and I think that he's done as good a job as he can protecting the squad that are clearly not capable at the moment. He hasn't turned on them. He hasn't said that wasn't good enough, because I think he understands that, and whenever he bats away transfer rumours or conjecture or questioning, he always says, well, do you know what, if this is the squad we go with, this is the squad we go with, because it doesn't help anyone for him to say, well, they're not good enough. And I think a part of that protection and the arm around the shoulder has been trying any combination of forward players that isn't putting Daisen Maeda back into the centre forward position, because it undermines Johnny Kenny, it undermines Shin Yamada, it undermines Adam Ida. And I think last night he was like, I literally don't have any other choices. So yeah, you're getting hooked at half time, and Maeda is going to play through there, and it'll be really interesting to see what he does at the weekend and what he does next week, because Ida doesn't look like he's in a bad run of form, and he just needs a goal to kind of get back up. It looks like there's something really seriously, fundamentally broken, and I think if we were in a better shape in the window, I would be looking to get a deal, cut price deal, get him out the door and try and replace him. And to compound matters, I know he's not had many games, but Shin Yamada does not look like the Kyogo regen that we hoped he would be. So there are real problems in that department. But yeah, there was a lot of very poor performances, but Adam Ida typified that more than anything. And I don't see a way back for him with the fans. And if the manager's run out of patience, then he's just going to become this extremely expensive albatross.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think everyone is sort of, anyone that still had any hope in him is sort of slowly dying out because of performances like last night and how he started the season, Scott. And it's, I can see why Rodgers has tried to kind of continue with him because of the transfer fee and the fact that he did manage to score 20 goals last season. But I think, as Stu says that I think Rodgers has lost all confidence and faith with him now, and I'd imagine that he probably won't start the next game.
Yeah, it really did feel like the last straw last night, and I'm sure Rodgers didn't want to take him off at half time because, up to a point, his reputation is sort of tied up with he does because he's the one that brought him to the club and strongly advocated for us to sign him last summer, even at those really inflated figures. But he really didn't have an option, and I think it says something when you're in such a big game against what looks on paper such a beatable opponent, and the only alternative is Johnny Kenny, who isn't good enough, and Yamada, who don't want to write him off just yet, looks like he isn't good enough either, or putting Dyson up front, which Rodgers clearly only wants to do as a break glass in case of emergency at the moment because we're so short of options and quality on the wings. But he was forced into doing it last night. Like the performance from Ida was that abject. He really had no choice in the matter, and yeah, I think we will. I don't think we'll be lucky enough to get rid of him before the end of this window. I think we will see him again, but I think the idea of him being the starter basically died a death last night. And just to pick up on what Stuart was saying about Rodgers as well, I think he's in a really interesting place now because I've probably been quite critical of him a lot recently, but last night was the first time where I actually just started to feel sorry for him.
Yeah.
Especially if you've seen I don't know if it was BBC or STV or whatever, but they put together like a minute-long compilation today of just journalists asking him similar sorts of questions and him just giving these really short, exasperated answers of just like, I don't know, I can't say. And it was all just like he's being asked to cover for the board basically, and he's obviously not in the mood to do that anymore, and nor should he be. But I think I was saying to someone earlier on, I feel like we're just it's like the worst of both worlds with Rodgers at this point, whereby a lot of us don't really want him to still be the manager this time last year. But I think it's still such a condemnation of the club that they clearly do want him to be the manager this time next year. Sorry. But they've gotten themselves into a situation where it's more or less impossible because you've pissed them off that much, you've embarrassed them this much in public, that clearly we're in the same boat that we were in the third season of his first spell at the club.
Yeah, I think that's some great points. And just before you come in, just kind of picking up what Scott was saying about the kind of worst of both worlds, I think it was you maybe raised the point kind of after the cup final that Rodgers has kind of lost that sort of what's the word?
Invincibility.
Invincibility, yeah, because his record against Rangers was exemplary the first time around. I think he'd only lost one. He'd never lost at Hampden, never lost a cup final, and all of those things have been chipped away. And I think at the time when we were discussing that, we were saying, well, this gives him a bit of fire to kind of bite back. But when he's not been given the tools to do it, I too share the feelings that yourself and Scott have said about feeling sorry for him a bit. And just before you come in, Stu, I was thinking the questions, they were hard hitting last night, but I was actually quite enthused by the nature of them because they were saying, like, should the fans accept this or should it be you who's having to answer this? But I was also thinking it's a bit like The Simpsons, like stop, he's already dead, because he couldn't find the words and he just looked so despondent and so uncomfortable, which is unlike him.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like there's two things going on there where obviously the main positive I think that's come out from last night is the audible continued sack the board chanting that went on because we've talked a lot privately and probably have talked a bit about on the pod that, you know, what's it going to take for there to be an uprising or some sort of challenging of the status quo, because whatever you think of Rodgers, if Rodgers was to go tomorrow, say we get knocked out next week and he goes, who do you think's fucking lining up the next chump? It's these same clowns that are in charge. So that's kind of where the problem is. And just on a point that you made, Scott, about how Adam Ida is very much tied to Rodgers reputationally, I think people forget how Adam Ida came to the club, and it's because, again, Celtic had failed to bring in a striker with days to go in the window when the manager had been very clear that he wanted one. And he manages to pull this sort of often questioned, I saw this guy play in this game and, I've always been a fan of him, and manages to get him in, get a deal done over the line very much late in the day. And I guarantee you it's not our scouting department that's gone, do you think Adam Ida is a good fit? It's definitely Brendan Rodgers, in the same way that when we were unable to bring in a goalkeeper, Brendan Rodgers, and we know this for a fact, literally text Kasper Schmeichel when he was on holiday, like, fancy it? And he was like, yeah, all right. And now the striker that we're linked with to come and save our season is Jamie Vardy, another manager tip. So Brendan Rodgers does get attached to players, and he does. The notion that he's like really fought for Adam Ida, I know he did when he's come in and had that loan spell and he's done well, and it's been evident that the manager wants to make that permanent. I think that's pretty justifiable to do that. But the whole way that that's come around is because we haven't had the procedures in place to just go and sign a striker, go and scout one, get a price for him, buy him, without having to ask Rodgers to sort of bail us out quite late in the window. So it's a real double-edged sword, and God, can you imagine if you'd it's like recommending someone at your work and then they turn out to just be an absolute nightmare, and you're like, fuck, I'm really stuck with him. But to the latter point, Barry, about the questions and stuff like that from the press, I was really heartened that is the narrative coming out. It's been the narrative among Celtic fans. It's probably not been the narrative amongst the majority of Celtic fans, if you want to get into a sort of happy clappers debate and people that are happy to go along so long as we're kind of just a bit better than Rangers or we're winning trophies domestically. But the fact that now the narrative in the mainstream press and the questions that the press are asking is about the board and the fundamental stuff, and you are now seeing an appetite from people to try and unseat them, try and just do whatever you can to try and change the status quo, I think is a real positive. And maybe it's going to take, I mean, to get proper change, I don't want to go through a season as disastrous as the 10, but maybe if it means missing out on the Champions League and being really properly globally embarrassed, if that brings around change, then I think you have to ask whether that's maybe that's worth it at this stage, because it's the same people and it's the same problems. The question last night about, they was asked in a couple of different ways, are the fans entitled to, do they have a right to feel this way? And the boy that asked, he was like, well, you've said the exact same quotes year on year about the window's not been good enough. So at this stage, this is kind of the consequence of it. And I think that is the reality, that if it's not Rodgers in this window, it's going to be the next manager in the January window, and so on and so forth, until something properly changes at the top. Yeah,
I was thinking about this today, Stuart. Like, I think there's so many different ways that people will try and sort of legislate for what's happening, and people say, like, oh, maybe they don't want to give Rodgers the money because of all the money he spent last year, and so on, and it maybe hasn't worked out. But it's the same, multiple managers now. Martin O'Neill, we mentioned last week, Martin O'Neill mentioned that he had to fight tooth and nail to get money off the board. Ange experienced it, Lennon, Rodgers the first time, and the one constant is the board. And I think that was probably the only positive thing last night, as you say, was the chanting. Because I couldn't face watching any highlights or anything today, but I'm sort of encouraged by the fact that people are saying it was so loud on the TV, and that's great, because something does have to change. We'll kind of rattle through some more questions. So Troy says, hope all is well, apologies in advance for the rant. Right now I'm so fucking angry. On a train back to London where I live, so just spent £200 in trains and accommodation on top of a ticket to come up and watch that drivel against Kairat. We were pathetic. There's a clear breakdown between Brendan Rodgers and the board, which is playing out on the park. Sadly, the board aren't going anywhere, and even if we replaced Dermot Desmond, he would just put more accountant yes men in. So Brendan Rodgers is clearly off, whether imminently or at the end of the season. Can't say as I'm sorry as I've never forgiven him. However, firstly, who would you like to replace him? And secondly, who would actually come in given the board refused to spend any serious money? How you get up for some of these reactions, I'll never know. So that was obviously sent in for reaction, Scott, but I can't even think about a new manager just yet, because I think it's been said in various pods across the Cynic in the last couple of weeks, if someone with the sort of standing and calibre of Brendan Rodgers, who, like him or loathe him, he has been very successful, one of the most successful managers in history, a manager who has had success down south in England, and probably was really highly respected until how it ended at Leicester. But he probably still does have a bit of a decent reputation down there. If someone with that clout in the game can't get them to loosen the purse strings, who can? Because I only see us downsizing even more after Rodgers, and the thought of sort of Kennedy and Maloney / Scott Brown dream team is the kind of stuff of nightmares, but I could well see it happening.
Yeah, when Rodgers first came back, we spoke about it a lot, didn't we? The idea that whatever you think about him, whatever his flaws might be, he is the best manager Celtic could possibly attract. So that's why it's so depressing to see this sort of familiar pattern playing out. And I don't know if about yous, but one of the many pleasures of watching the Rangers game on Tuesday night was I was looking at Bruges and I was thinking, like, their manager has done an unreal job there. I wonder if he's the kind of guy we would look at eventually. But you can't even really go there in your head at this point, because you are just thinking, well, he'd be banging his head against the same brick wall that every Celtic manager has for so long. Like, I was thinking that when I went to the pub to watch the game last night, I just didn't feel up for it at all. And I was thinking, how often, like in our lifetimes as Celtic fans, have we been in this situation of going into a massive Champions League qualifier just half cooked, like having not spent enough money, having not made enough signings? I just feel like it's been happening for a lifetime, and basically with the same people making the same mistakes. Maybe not Nicholson, but certainly Lawwell, Desmond, and a lot of the other ones whose names don't roll off the tongue quite as naturally, but they have been there a long time. So yeah, I really feel sorry for anyone who spent a lot of time and money getting there last night, because it was absolutely abject. I mentioned earlier on how limited a team that is, and for us to get, what was it, 0.55 XG against them, like, that is a disgrace. That is an absolute disgrace.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned earlier, Scott, about how you kind of looked into them today, maybe not as much before the game, and you could maybe argue, Stu, that that's the think Celtic maybe underestimated them. Ryan said here, ignoring the dereliction of duty in terms of recruitment, we had no idea what to expect from Kairat. No plan to break them down, and completely taken by surprise. It was like watching a team play Cameroon or Colombia at a 90s World Cup. Are we investing sufficiently in opposition data analysis, or just leaving this to leaving this to chance as well?
I mean, almost definitely not. I would imagine if just the general standards across the club are anything to go by, then almost definitely not. Yeah, I don't know if they would have taken them lightly. I think that given what was at stake, I'm not sure. But yeah, what bothered me was just a lack of, in most Champions League games, and you even saw it, it wasn't like the Young Boys game last year where you were playing a team that Celtic were clearly better than, and we were playing 100 miles an hour and it just wasn't happening, and we kept having these disallowed goals and stuff like that, and the luck wasn't with you. It was very similar to like the St Mirren game, where it was extremely pedestrian, and just, it could have been any game, could have still been pre-season. There just seemed like there was no fire and no anything really. And just kind of circling back slightly to the question about management, I think you are right that you're probably not going to be able to get a manager that comes in and suddenly you're able to spend 30 or 40 million pounds in a summer, and suddenly the transfer procedures all change. I think the only way that you would see that is a change of ownership of the club, which will realistically only happen when Dermot Desmond is no longer alive, and it will still be in his family. Perhaps there'll be if there was some change, you could see how quickly things can change when someone like a Dom Mackay comes in. And I'm not saying that's for the better, but I'm just saying that someone that comes in with clear ideas can change things. Obviously, they didn't like it and got rid of him immediately, but there is the potential for that. And so I suppose in terms of innovating, you would probably just need a manager that's going to try and approach the football side of it slightly differently. And I suppose you had that with Ange Postecoglou. It was a very much this is our style of play. And if you're looking at scouting data and whatever, and even what some of the players have gone on to, Liel Abada, Giacomakis, players like that, have not really gone on to absolutely tear up trees, and we didn't just get them at the right time in their career. They probably are reasonably limited players in the pantheon of world football. But yeah, everything that we had was really driven by a game plan and a style of play, and it all sort of fit together kind of perfectly. And I think there are managers out there that could probably offer that in a slightly more modern way than Rodgers does. Just to offer a couple of names out, I think Craig Bellamy is going to have an excellent managerial career and could be a good option. Chris Davies as well, obviously very well linked with the club. But these are two managers that currently have very exciting projects of their own that they would probably want to see through. And whilst I think that Celtic would represent a massive opportunity for either of them in terms of massive club, desire to win, need to win, and European football, I don't think that's something that's going to happen. And I know that Rodgers is very much on 200 and 300 and 400% here this season, but I can definitely see a world where even in the next couple of weeks that could all change, where his position becomes untenable, whether he falls on his sword, whether he's just looking for an out because it's not workable anymore. And the one that I always really, or I have my eye on at the moment, is that West Ham job, because I think Graham Potter's definitely going to get binned, and I think that Rodgers would be a perfect sort of next man up for them. So that's maybe one to watch.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting to see, like, again, I think, Scott, you mentioned last week the Mick McCarthy. It can't go on like this, can it? But I've got this terrible fear that it could get a lot worse from here. And we'll come on to talk about some links that have been mysteriously magicked up this afternoon. Surprise, surprise about transfers. But as Stu says, it could be, if we don't go through on Tuesday and we don't get a favourable result at Ibrox, plus I think we're all resigned that we're not going to get anywhere near the business done that we needed to get done. It could get even bleaker than this at this point.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think we've all sort of, as Celtic fans, sort of rubbed our hands with glee at the idea that, like, Rangers could be sort of cooked by the end of September. Even if suddenly it clicks for Russell Martin, then by that point they could be out of the Champions League, out of the League Cup, 8 or 9 points behind in the league or whatever. Almost like a point of no return. But I mean, it's not too hard to imagine a similar-ish thing could happen to us if we don't get any decent business done, and if we don't get the job done in Kazakhstan next Tuesday. I mean, we'd have to go something manage to lose to Partick Thistle in the League Cup, but there's certainly the depth of just the ineptitude last night. You're almost not ruling anything out. And yeah, talking earlier on about sort of taking tiny positives from negative outcomes, I think the one thing, we spoke about it last week, didn't we? You asked me about the Falkirk game and did I think there was going to be any demonstration, and I just didn't really have any faith that there would be. And here we are, like a week later, and that we all heard the chants last night. I think there will be something of some description at Livy this weekend, and as much as that's all coming from a negative place, that's and that in a sense is really positive to see, because I just don't think even the fans who've really been agitating for change, I don't think they thought there was enough like-minded individuals out there to really get something substantial off the ground. Because so many of the discussions we're having here are sort of circular, because it's like, is Rodgers going to stay or go? Who would we get in if we left? Like, whoever it is, they're constantly just going to be undermined by this board and this business model, and the only way that's going to change is through serious, sustained protest, I think. So I really am interested to see what happens on Saturday. And as I say, it sounds strange to be saying that's a positive thing, that people chanting sack the board, but I think that sort of level of unity, and even the people who would have sort of fought back against that notion that we were a struggling or a failing football club until recently, the fact that they are now on the same page, I think that could be a positive if it does go in the sort of direction that we're worried it might.
Yeah, I think just to kind of sort of touch more on the protest aspect and the chanting last night. Stuart, come to you with this one. Jim said, evening troops didn't have a calm head last night to message. I'm sure I messaged this summer or last asking what can we as fans do about this board. Is it at the point of some physical action such as walkouts or late walk-ins? Or is there even something we could do? He goes on to say, P.S. Beyond the point of breaking scales, he's a guy being put in the firing line at a level so far beyond his capabilities. But it's, I think, as Scott says, Stu, like, this comes round all the time. Like, there's always disharmony with the board, but I think we could feel it building, couldn't we? Like, maybe last summer, I know we were annoyed, but when we kind of started to kind of go up to that next bracket in terms of level of spending for more than one player, the fact that we did it for a 6 million signing, a 9 million signing, 11 million signing, we maybe foolishly thought that this would become the norm. Obviously, we spent almost all of the Kyogo money on Jota, but it's just gone full circle. And I remember there was the sack the board chance in December 2023. We lost 2-0, or we were losing 2-0.
Hearts.
To Hearts, yeah, the day that Santa got booed. God love him. But last night was far more people in the stadium. It was during a match that, if you were a happy clapper, you could say it was still there to be won, or the fact that we weren't losing, etc. But like Scott says, I'm taking a positive out of that people have had enough. And I agree with Scott. I think that from before the game, from the first whistle, no matter what's happening on the pitch, there will be anti-board sentiment, and it will be demonstrated through hopefully banners and certainly more of a chance of the same as last night.
Yep, I would absolutely encourage that. I think that you have to make these people feel as uncomfortable as possible, and I'm sure that there are many ways that can be done, whether it's chanting, protest, walkouts, etc. I think that they, generally speaking, don't deal well with public humiliation. You saw that from Rodgers' appointment in his first time around. That was something that we wouldn't normally reach to do, but when Desmond's ego was bruised, that's kind of the level that he went to. I think the stuff around 2023 and the last times there were sort of murmurings of discontent, even in the summer, like last summer, as you said. I think that's probably from there's always, as you say, that uneasy relationship between the board and the fan or fan groups with the stuff that you've seen over the years with the Green Brigade. And I think that largely speaking, that's probably quite a positive thing. I think you do always want to have someone that you try and hold to account on both sides. And I can see why maybe the majority of the support wouldn't necessarily get on board with that or necessarily sympathise with, a fan group like the Green Brigade, if that's not something that they have any interest in, or if they just literally want to see Celtic win the league every year, that's it. I can see why they don't really want to rip up, what they see as a pretty good thing, delivering all this success. But you're now at a point where the way that the Celtic board conduct themselves and do business is damaging us on the pitch. It's damaging a positive relationship with a successful manager. Some of the things that they're implementing are putting fan safety at risk. They are constantly fleecing fans financially. They're giving absolutely nothing back. And it's at that point where people do have to sort of draw a line in the sand, or what's it going to become? What's the next thing? The club have never been richer in terms of cash. My brother Ian and Martin Friel would be better placed to sort of talk to you in absolutes about how insane Celtic's hoarding of cash is. I think Ian messaged today to say that essentially in an industry like football where people tend not to hoard cash at all, to have £100 million in the bank is almost like sitting on £1 billion in like a big proper company and not knowing what to do with it. And I think that it's just, there's now more and more red flags and markers that these people are not very good at running a football club, and certainly not one with the scale and potential of a club like Celtic. There is no reason that when you look at how Bruges or even a club like Bodo Glimt, who sailed through their qualifier last night and they're about to hit unprecedented heights, to see what they can achieve on smaller budgets than we have, there is no excuse for Celtic not being a regular contender in the Champions League, to regularly expect to get into the latter stages, as in quarterfinals. I'm not suggesting where you're expecting to win the Champions League, but to at least have the ambition to want to or to try to. And at the moment, it's unclear what's the line that the board are trying to hold, because it doesn't make any business sense to essentially pay off a massive tax bill on this cash that you've got not doing anything when you could be reinvesting it. And the penny pinching that we've seen, it's like, I know we'll probably touch on it, the transfer targets that I think that we probably will get over the line are the same transfer targets that we've been not getting over the line all summer, and they're just going back with a slight willingness to play ball. So why approach it with this trying to get the best deal on absolutely everything? Why can't you just do what Club Brugge do and spend the money, get five or six players in that ensure you guaranteed qualification, and then the money comes rolling round? It should be the easiest thing in the world to run a club like Celtic, and they're just so incredibly bad at it.
Yeah, I think all those points are spot on, and it just really it's so depressing. And I think we'd all seen it coming as well, because we've seen this movie so many times. Scott, just before I get your kind of thoughts on that, in a similar vein, Chris has sent in saying, absolutely livid, so this might not make sense. However, the stadium is a shithole, crumbling in places. The women's team and academy seem like an inconvenience we'd rather be rid of. Then we get to the managed decline of the team from Munich away. It's truly frightening. So this leads me to this. What's the fucking point? If all we are is cash cows to be 1 point ahead of them and treat Europe as an afterthought, what's the point? If we're not striving to be the best we can possibly be on and off the park, which we clearly are not, what's the point? I, like everyone else, love this club, but the current custodians have sucked any enjoyment out of following Celtic. Cunts, a lot of them. I think that's kind of touched the temperature on how all of us are feeling, certainly on here tonight anyway, Scott.
Yeah, it's absolutely bang on. And I am the sort of fan, I probably am guilty of just focusing on the first team in isolation, but all those other points about the women's team and the academy are absolutely spot on as well. And it's so strange that, you know, if you were to talk to an English football pundit, for example, they would look at Celtic from the outside as just this bastion of just never-ending success. But if you actually look under the bonnet, other than, I know it's a big thing to put to one side, but other than collecting trophies consistently season in, season out, what success stories are there at the club? And even other people within Scottish football might find that ridiculous for us to complain about it. They'd say first world problems, but when you do see the potential that we have in terms of the amount of money in the bank, as we've just touched on, the ground, the reputation that we have globally, the way that, you know, we have such a, if you look at the banners and the songs and stuff like that, we have such a kind of clever, passionate, funny fan base that just are getting treated like adversaries by the board at the moment. We have all these natural assets which are just sort of withering on the vine. Sorry, this is definitely one of the most depressing podcasts we've ever done, isn't it? It feels like we've already been knocked out. But yeah, the bigger picture is just such a sort of bleak one at the moment.
Yeah, it is difficult, and I think it is sort of a depressing and sort of negative podcast, but it's all a result of the board's doing. Stuart, let me ask you this. I know we kind of touched on it already, and while we do have sympathy for Rodgers, how much of the blame does he, I suppose, him and the players take for last night in isolation?
I think they have to carry the can, because ultimately they need to find a way to win. And like I say, the application just wasn't great from the word go. I think that it's really startling to see the difference just in the way we play. So, and I guess it's where you draw the line of, is that a personnel thing, or is that the way that they're being set up, that they've been coached to do that? And I'm not too sure where the line is. I think that possibly does depend on how you feel about Brendan Rodgers and if you have been waiting to sort of grind the axe with him. But if you think about how frequently we scored this particular goal last year, where either Alistair Johnston or Nicholas Kuhn would burst down the right, the other would overlap, there would be a ball inside, and then they would score a goal. And it was just like, that's a really clear pattern of play. That's how we do that. are we not doing that as much now because you don't know who's going to literally be playing at right wing because we're so short on options, or because a player like James Forrest doesn't have the same engine as like a Nicholas Kuhn in terms of doing that it doesn't become viable? Do you have that issue with Kieran Tierney and Dyson Maeda as well, where that doesn't quite work in the same way, and there'd be a little bit of teething problems? But there's other stuff as well. Like, I thought Benjamin Negron was really poor last night, and you had a midfield that was not perfect last year but did function very well, and it's like Rodgers is almost determined to push ahead with this, and Engels is kind of the odd man out at the moment. He's also, Luke McCowan has arguably been one of the standouts of the season so far, but he's clearly still not trusted at like a European level. And you don't know whether or not all these things are just a function of so much of the personnel having to play positions that they're not naturally playing, or how you're going to manage these games. But even with an improper sort of lineup last night, they should absolutely be able to get that over the line. And they kind of talk about it a wee bit, that we're obviously screaming out for just any quality in the final third, but there was just no quality to speak of at all. I know that things sort of went up a level for about 5-10 minutes when Yang came on, and that was just a bit of energy, but Yang really reverted to type, I thought, after about 5 minutes. That first chance, you thought, oh my God, great, the game's come alive now. And then it was just the usual no end product, no guile, no correct decisions when you need them in order to unpick a defence like that, and just really frustrating. And I think that over the piece, you ultimately, because the horse is very much bolted in terms of the transfer business, like whatever business you do now, it's far too late for making any tangible difference in this. Obviously, we can't register anyone. So these players are going to have to go again, and they're going to have to figure it out. And I would expect that they can play better than that, obviously. But then you factor in the travel and the temperature and the altitude, and you would imagine Kairat probably play a bit differently at home, and also the Hoodoo have never won away there. And it becomes just a really, really difficult tie. And I think we all said that we're going to find a way to make this difficult, but I was just surprised that even with all the issues with transfers, that we've managed to make it this difficult.
Yeah, we've somehow found a way to do it. And Scott, obviously, a couple of questions for you here. So first one, do you think that, obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing, but do you think it seems foolish now that we didn't postpone the Livingston game for the weekend?
Possibly. I mean, for example, if KT starts on Saturday, like, you would be quite paranoid, wouldn't you? Because if there was any issue there and we were to be without him for a significant chunk of the season, and having to start Scales at left back in Kazakhstan, and bringing Trusty in, even just the fact that Livingston are going to turn up wearing the same colours and play exactly the same tactics, and quite possibly with the same degree of success against us, it could be triggering from a psychological point of view. But yeah, I can see both arguments with that one, but it does seem a bit strange after so many years of clubs banging a drum for, why do other leagues allow postponements before big European games and we never do, and then suddenly it's offered on a plate to us and we don't take it. I really don't think it's ideal in the build up to such a big game.
No, Stuart.
I was just going to say, you can only imagine that perhaps he's thought that there would be an opportunity to blood some players, and there just aren't.
Can't love him.
I know, and I know that after that, the Rangers game would always, had last night gone better for a start, you maybe would have one eye on the Rangers game at the weekend. But you're actually in a situation now where, so we need to win on Tuesday, and there isn't really an opportunity to play the second left back because they haven't signed one, and there isn't an opportunity to play a second right back, and we don't have a deputising right back now. So if Anthony Ralston gets injured in either of these two games, what do you do? And also, Rangers, obviously, that team looks really, really poor just now, and I thought Russell Martin was perhaps going to really hit the ground, and he hasn't, and it could click. It might be just a complete disaster. But the one bright spark that they've had is a really electrifying looking left winger, and Anthony Ralston is going to Ibrox to try and handle him. And you know that for half an hour, that when they've kind of finished games stronger than they started, and for half an hour we're going to have to play Liam Scales at left back there. So that should not be the case when you're in the last day of the window, and that's the situation that we're in. So it's not just a European thing. Domestically, if Rangers had started the season really, really well, that could be a massive, massive game, and that's the situation that we're in because of the board's negligence.
Yeah, that's a terrifying thought, because if you think of the team that finished last night, a large number of them will be expected to start or certainly play a part over the next couple of weeks. And then, Scott, my next question was, gun to your head, will we qualify?
Uh, I think so. Yeah, I think it will be absolutely horrible and grueling. And Rodgers referenced last night, didn't he? The 1-0 away to Rosenborg with Forest got the winner. I don't know if you remember the specifics of that, but that was a horrible, nervy night. Like there was no point where you felt comfortable. I think it could be like that, but I'd like to think, despite all our many problems, we would be able to get it over the line against such a limited team, despite as you know, as Stu says, like the time difference, the pitch, the altitude, like they have so many levelers to make up for their all quite obvious lack of ability. But yeah, I just don't want to imagine the way that the gates of hell will open up if we don't actually go through. But it certainly wouldn't solve all of our problems, but it would give us a bit of respite, which we really need at this point.
Yeah, definitely. And just as you were speaking there, I was thinking of how bad it possibly could be that come that final whistle we're not in there, because if we're feeling low just now, we can times that by 10 this time next week if it doesn't go our way. Stu, what about your thoughts? Do you think we have enough to get through?
I think they should have enough to get through, but I can absolutely see a world where you lose that game on penalties or something like that,
Jesus.
because that's the reality of it, and that's the position that they've put themselves in. And there is a part of me that, I mean, that squad is not equipped to play in the Champions League. If you look at, obviously you would expect that by September you will have some bodies in, whether they are just, I think we described them as just like literally pieces of meat, people to fill jerseys. You'll have different bodies in, but I can't imagine us getting a draw as kind as last year. And if you're having to play a Man City or a PSG or an Arsenal or someone like that, you're staring down the face of another potentially 5-6-7-0 sort of situation, and it's horrible to be that badly exposed because we've not prepared for it. And obviously it's disastrous to go out to a team as lowly as Kairat, but you have to ask, would you be better off with a Europa League run? Does failure to get into the Champions League, is that enough of a failure to say, well, Michael Nicholson, you take the can, carry the can for this, so you lose your job and there's no 120k bonus for you this year? And the same for Lawwell, and you see like proper change at the club. Does the manager leave? You know, who knows? There's so many permutations over the next sort of 10 days. I think they probably will have enough to get it over the line, but I think, like Scott says, it's just going to be horrible. And yeah, just a really unpleasant sort of 2 weeks. I wish I could sort of flash forward to the end and then just like coming off a manager holiday on Football Manager or something and just be like, we did what happened? Fucking hell, God. And then react to that and then just
we'll
get on
a
with
nice refreshing break when we get to watch Steve Clark Scotland.
That's the one.
Jesus.
That's the one.
But I was going to ask you, is actually like, especially after his comment last night about like sacked when it was a strange sort of contrived the way that he turned the conversation in that direction. But Rodgers' comments about, you know, sack the board, what usually happens is he sack the manager. Are you thinking he might just walk if we don't do it next Tuesday?
So I don't. You were watching in the pub, Scott, weren't you?
Yeah.
Was it the TNT interview you saw first?
There's two different ones, wasn't there?
There was. So basically, you've seen him do this a bunch of times, but you know that kind of where he's like thinks up a joke in the moment sort of thing.
Yeah.
He basically, I think it was the TNT interview that he does first, because it's like more of the pitch side one than it is. I can't believe I'm like trying to break down a Brendan Rodgers interview as if there's fucking any rhyme or reason to it. But he said it almost. He said it almost joking off the cuff. He's like, sack the boards. Normally, like, sack the manager. Am I right? It was kind of like that. And then I think,
and he's like, belter.
He's like, I've nailed that. But I think then it's just he's like, yeah, that's something. That's a thing to say. That's something people say, isn't it? And I think that I don't think because just from seeing that where you could sort of see it pop into his head in that interview. I don't think he's like, I'm going to sow the seeds because I'm off here. But I could absolutely see a world where if he's not backed at all, and if he's like got to face a season of this where Celtic might not win the league and we might not win any domestic cups and we're going to play in the Europa League, and the reputational damage that would do to him, I could totally see a world where he goes, this is untenable. You can say that, tell you what, I'll put the compensation to one side, or whatever, just to say you sacked me, and that's fine. I'll go off, and that I get to walk away hands clean. I think a lot of Celtic fans would love it if he was like, listen, this is why X, Y, and Z deal haven't been done. It's the board. It was Michael Nicholson, blah blah blah. Anyway, I'm not working like this. I'm off. And you think, oh, I'd have respect, but he's not going to do that. He's ultimately friends with Dermot Desmond, which is not helpful in the situation. But
did you see? Like I said earlier on about feeling sorry for him, but like at the same time, he is continuing to just fire out bizarre comments which just don't help the situation at all. See his thing about what he said to the players in the dressing room at half time?
No, what was that? I missed that, I think.
It was like, if you're gonna miss a bus, you should at least run for it.
Yeah, I heard that.
And it's like, what kind of fucking inspirational motto is that? It's like, almost like saying, we're gonna lose to this random mob from Kazakhstan, but at least try, lads.
Aye, as long as you've done a 10k in your
if I knew I was missing a bus, I absolutely would not run for it. I'd be like, that's going to be mortifying if I just miss it. And just while we're on sort of trying to decipher Brendanisms in this, I didn't watch his pre-match, like the sort of 20-minute one that he did with the press the day before, because they have just been rinse and repeat of him being frustrated, asking for transfer questions, etc. But the pull quote that I saw was about the players' attitude and Celtic paying your wages every month. And that sort of alarmed me a wee bit, that it sounded like there were multiple players that perhaps had one eye on a foot out the door. And I don't know if there was more context to that, but why should he have to say that at this stage in the season the players are uneasy but Celtic pay your wages so you have to try? Like that seems very odd to me, and that suggests that on top of the four players that we're all pretty much universally agreed that we need, a couple of wingers, striker, left back, we now need a right back.
Yep.
And then you also need to replace any players that are going to go out in the last 10 days. It's crazy.
Yeah,
it's back to the Mick McCarthy thing again, isn't it? That everything goes back to. But yeah, Scott, I think probably up until in the car last night, coming back for the game, when I heard Rodgers on Radio Scotland, it was the first time that I thought, like, given how despondent and sort of down that he sounded, that I could well see a situation where he would walk away with it. And am I right in saying that's what he did at Leicester? He kind of resigned before he was sacked, didn't he? I think.
I can't remember, actually. It was like,
I think he might have.
2 or 3 months before the end of the season, wasn't it?
We can check that. But I think that if we're going doomsday scenario, if we were to go out on Tuesday and then, as I think will happen, that we'll pull back even more, if that's possible, on signings, if we're going to be in the Europa League, then I could see him, although Leicester did sack him, we could see a situation where he does walk away. And just to sort of move on to some news, I touched on it earlier. So Anthony Joseph said that Celtic are ramping up their pursuit of go-ahead Eagles attacking midfielder Jakob Broom. Sky Sports News understands fresh talks have been held today for the Denmark under-21 international, who can also play on both wings. It's understood they're looking for a fee of at least 5 million. Stu used the phrase that the horse is already bolted. On top of this, we've also had sort of more information that there's still a sort of haggling going on over signing on fees or wages for Balikwisha. Does this just seem like classic Celtic spin? Do something because of how uncomfortable they felt last night?
Yeah, I think it's more being seen to do something or seen to be listening. Another example of that, we haven't really touched on it, and to be honest, I know that there were still issues, but because of how bad it was on the pitch, there wasn't so much made about the barriers and stuff like that in the ground. I thought that the statement that they released about that had a real air of, oh, we are listening and we do totally get the temperature. It wasn't just like a let's just throw out a quick set. It was like almost overwritten to the point of like, I can guess we've fucked this, right? Okay, sorry. And I feel like there's a wee bit of that with these links, but I was laughing when you said Anthony Joseph, just the wording where he's like, are ramping up their pursuit of Broym.
Yeah.
It's like ramping up a pursuit of someone who's literally stood still and said, I'll absolutely come and sign for your club. You just have to pay this slightly smaller, like slightly more money. And it's not a huge amount of money. You've got £100 million. And it's almost like with the ramping up, we're just like circling around him even faster. It's like, this is not a pursuit. You're not having to fight off anyone. And that's as alarming in itself. The same with the Balikwisha deal. He's been there for 6, 7, 8 weeks, that deal, and nobody's gone, well, we'll pip Celtic to the post for that one. So that maybe tells its own story, but these are easy deals to do, I think, if you're willing to just pay the money. And it's not a huge amount of money. It's not we don't want to redo the wage structure. We don't want to pay 11, 12 million pounds and have that become the norm. We're talking about signing 2 players for less than 5 million pounds. The money that they spunked on, Nawrocki, Lagerbielke, and that's before we get into Barkas and all the proper disasters over the years. Just fucking pay the money.
Yeah. And Scott, it's just, we said just before we came on air, it was kind of that sort of mixed feelings of damned if they do, damned if they don't now, because any signing that comes in, even if they are really shit hot, it's just going to feel like, what if, like, they should have been in, like as Stu says, like the Balikwisha and Brown deals, they feel like 2 deals that could have been done on the 1st of July.
Yeah, and the thing is, if they prize money as much as they appear to, then I don't know why they are so bad at business, because all that'll have happened in the meantime is that the price will have just crept up because they know how desperate we are. Like I don't want to invoke the Michael Nicholson Harvard Business School thing again, but it's like he surely understands the concept of a false economy. Like Celtic do this every time, of just acting like if we wait and we wait and we wait, then we'll have to pay less money. But it's a bit like, if you've got a car that, like an old car that you're constantly having to pay for repairs, instead of just going out and buying a new one. Like buying a new one might seem more expensive, but in the long term you save more money. But they constantly just get caught up in these small-minded like patterns of thought every summer, and that's what worries me at the moment. Is so much of the conversation is predicated on why aren't we spending more money? Why aren't we signing more players? And I agree with that. I'm on board with it. But so much of our problems stem from the fact that we're bad at signing players. We've got like less than a 50% hit rate. All of our problems are coming from the guys we signed last summer aren't good enough. The guys we signed the summer before that aren't good enough. Like the Greg Taylor thing, for example, a lot of the chat about Maeda and Tierney and that side of the pitch, it comes from people saying we're missing Greg Taylor, we're missing that interrelationship between him and Maeda, we're missing that him sort of inverting and the effect that had on our build-up play. But he was quite a limited player in a lot of ways, Greg Taylor. So what does that say about the structure of your football club and your recruitment if a guy who, had his attributes, but he also had his weaknesses, if he goes and that disrupts you in such a massive way, what does that say? And I think the main thing you can take away from it is we became so reliant on Greg Taylor because we signed 4 or 5 guys to replace him, and not one of them was good enough. And I think you can just project that into lots of different areas of the team. We keep creating, instead of solving problems in every transfer window, we're just storing up more trouble for itself, and it perpetuates over and over again. And how they can't see that it needs not just more money spent, but money spent properly with people who are actually qualified in the field, sporting directors, heads of recruitment, etc. I just don't understand, because it's as I say, it's just a self-perpetuating problem.
Yeah, it's true.
Graham Mackay made a really good point earlier on in one of the group chats, and I'm probably going to butcher it, so apologies to Graham, but basically pointing out that it's so well, there's lots of conjecture about where is the bottleneck. Is it the footballing department? Is it the scouting department? Is it the money men? At what point, as like the board, do they look at that and go, well, why is this not working? Why can't we get players through the door here? If it's the football department, why don't you replace the football department and try and improve that side of it? If it's the money men, what's the sticking point, and how do you do that? But because you're seeing the same results year on year, So why can't you identify that as a part of your business, saying like the people below me are not doing their jobs, we need to improve that part so that it all moves smoother next year. It's the same things that happen every year where Celtic are overpaying for players, we're not getting players in a timely fashion. Every now and then we do good business and we'll sell someone on for a lot of money. But it's ultimately like a broken structure, and how you can look at that and think, well, that's fine, we'll just continue operating like that, and operating with no transparency as well. It's just absolutely insane. And so, yeah, how many times has Brendan Rodgers himself at the end of a window said we need to review this and how it's all done, and then it's the same, if not worse, the next time around. So there doesn't even seem to be that much of an appetite to streamline the process or get better at the process. This is just the process, and this is the way that we do things, and it's not the correct way to do things.
Yeah, you're right to raise that point, because you could go back and find an article from when windows have shut. It always seems to be the next day or the next couple of days where he says obviously every manager would want more, and he was sort of really sort of steadfast in that comment about the process wasn't working, and if anything it's got worse than it was at that point, which is just ludicrous. Kind of conscious of time, so we'll kind of briefly preview the Livingston game Saturday 3 o'clock at Celtic Park. And team selection, Scott, it could be an interesting one because of the injuries, because of, as you say, the need to protect certain individuals, because they are literally the only bodies we have in that position. So if you're looking for Celtic to play football the Glasgow Celtic way, I would suggest that you maybe cover your eyes on Saturday for 90 minutes.
Yeah. I really, we touched on it with earlier on. Like, he just cannot be in that starting lineup. So at that point, I suppose you're going to have to. I imagine he would probably bring Kenny in if he doesn't shift Dyson inside. I think we could do with trying out something different in midfield, because the Negron thing isn't quite working at the moment.
Nope.
But I wouldn't be surprised if he more or less just named the most predictable and in his eyes strongest lineup. I don't think we'll see a great amount of rotation or people being rested, because I don't think he thinks he can afford to at the moment. But I suppose the problem at the moment is what Rodgers perceives to be the safe option is, in a lot of our eyes, quite risky, because you're just keeping these weak links in the team. But I really don't know. There's a lot of problems at the moment that don't have simple answers to them. Like, what you do on the wings, I'm not sure. I thought Forrest was so poor last night.
Yeah, awful.
But do you want to start Yang? Not really. Yeah, there's no easy answers, unfortunately. As I said, I'd quite like to see Tierney rested, but what do you do at that point? Who do you're surely not playing Scales for 90 minutes at left back? Yeah, I just think, like, I know we're a newly promoted team and all that, but Martindale is I think he'll be absolutely relishing this game, because they've been quite successful, even at the peak. Angiers and so on have come in and frustrating us and getting 0-0s and stuff. And I think they'll really fancy their chances of something similar on Saturday.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's probably, in many ways, Stu, it's probably the worst team that you could be facing, given they will have the lowest of low blocks. But if you wanted to spin it positively, it probably lends itself well for protest, because you can't imagine it will be free-flowing football. And
I hadn't looked at it that way. I hadn't thought about the actual in-game leading to protest, but yes, I suppose you're right. Yeah.
And I think as well that it's just even trying to think outside the box, as Scott says, it probably will be as predictable as possible from Rodgers, because A, he doesn't have many options, and B, he'll probably just want to try and do the same thing that he always does. But could you see any kind of curveballs? Could Osman come in, for example, or anything like that? No?
I don't think so, and I don't think against a physical, robust team like Livingston. But I think that maybe you could see Dane Murray or Jemai Simpson-Pusey possibly playing instead of Carter Vickers, because I guess you just have to think about, on top of the injury worries that you're dealing with, playing Cameron Carter-Vickers for 4 games in the space of like 15, 14, 10 days, whatever it is, who knows, is probably not ideal with such important games around the corner. So I wouldn't be surprised if he sat out, and it's just whether or not you have the cover to potentially rest Tierney. I think I always who was the young right back that was playing in pre-season? I always confuse him with the centre half.
Was it Donovan?
Donovan.
Colby, is that his
Colby
name?
Donovan, yeah.
So did he not go out on loan?
Not yet.
Not
I think
yet.
He's still here, yeah.
So you would imagine that he'll probably be
On
on the bench. I know that Rodgers he was as vocal as he's been about Inamura through the week, that, you know, he's not of a defensive level to be in the European squad, etc. But do you not think that in a game where you would expect Celtic to have upwards of like 70% possession, that's something that you could do to take a bit of the pressure off of Tierney? And I know that it's political, and I know that I'm just speaking into the void here because it's not something that's going to happen, but that'd be good, wouldn't it?
I would counter it though, that you're not probably going to face a more physical team.
I know.
Yeah, they kind of play strikers on the wings and stuff, don't they? Like the Muirhead or someone horrible up against them. Like, I'm not, like, especially if we chucked Simpson Pusey in, I could just imagine him having a really rough afternoon, and then we just don't see him again.
Yeah.
You can just imagine like the camera panning on his face, like just like sweating, like what the fuck is this?
Stevie May wheels away after scoring
Julian. I think you'll probably see Luke McCowan, and I think you'll probably see Arne Engels. Maybe Bernardo. Maybe this is a chance to kind of see what he can do. But it's just what you do with the front three. It's so. I mean, what we sort of touched on at the very top. Dyson Maeda's really out of form just now. He's been really poor. And the problem that you have is that he's the absolute best you have across the front three. And even the lack of depth, not only is it just, you know, what if he gets injured, but there's no competition. If he's played badly, there's no one to take him off. There's no one to come on in the way that you would if, like, it was Jota, Abada, all these kind of players. And you're like, well, they're somewhat interchangeable. And it's crazy how fucking bad it is. I suppose, really. I was trying to think of something smarter to say, but it's all fucked. So
yes, that's the thing. I think we'll maybe just leave it there. I think that I'd imagine that there will be, Scott. I imagine there will be protests probably before the game, during the game as the game starts, and probably regardless of what's happening on the pitch. And I think that's probably for the best, actually, because I think there is, as we mentioned, there's a lot of blame to go around. All of it, in my eyes, or 98% of it, should be directed at the board. Obviously, the manager and the players do have to take some of the blame, but I hope that the manager and the players realise that it's bigger than them, and all eyes and all the sort of noises for those that are sitting in the comfy seats, and not particularly for them on the pitch and those in the dugout.
Yeah, because people just it might feel like banging their head against the brick wall, but people need to do something to signal to the board that that this is just a vicious cycle, and I was going to say it can't go on like
It's guilty, have a button where it just
stop before it becomes a catchphrase. But yeah, because I keep coming back to the thing that, like, even the best case scenario where we go out and get 4 or 5 signings and they all slot into the team and look up to the standard, even in that best case scenario, you have alienated the whole fan base, you've embarrassed the manager publicly, and you've sort of pissed off half the club presidents and sporting directors across Europe as well. And football is sort of like a village, like, it's gossipy. So people are going, oh, here comes Celtic. Like, that's what it's going to be like for years to come, because we keep operating in this extremely sort of stingy, sort of adversarial way with clubs, rather than just looking to do business with them with a bit of tact and diplomacy. So you mentioned a minute ago the idea of clubs sitting down and reviewing what they've done after every transfer window, which I think every modern forward-thinking football club does. It's hard to imagine us doing it after what's going on in the recent past. But if that process does happen, as I say, even if some guys do come in and hit the ground running, surely there's got to be a level of recognition there that this is just a really unhealthy way to run a football club. But do we expect that level of self-awareness from them? No. So we really do need that. protest to sort of ramp up. Unfortunately, it's not a thing you want to be doing, encouraging protests
No.
and stuff. But I think that's where we're at, really.
Yeah, we're kind of helpless any other way, Stu.
Yeah,
Yeah, just that I think that even if, say, Celtic go over on Tuesday night and they comfortably win 3-0, and you're like, oh, that was a scare, we got over that. And say Balakisha and Brown and Jamie Vardy come in by the end of the week
Jesus.
and they sign a left back and you bring in a right back on loan. That's not that doesn't change anything for me. That doesn't change the fact that this is an unsustainable way to run a football club. It doesn't change the disrespect that they've shown to the fans, how they've endangered the fans. Just the myriad things that go on at this football club. None of, like, Michael Nicholson's position is untenable. Peter Lawwell's position is untenable. Like, they need to go. And I think it should just be as simple as we talked about it. You know, a manager carries the can for the team and they'll get the bullet. And it's exactly this. It's corporate negligence. It's negligence on that scale. And sorry, mate, even if it's just for keeping up appearances to try and bring harmony back, you need to take the hit. And yeah, the cushy job's gone. Sorry, and that's how it is. And that shouldn't go away if we sort of right the ship. And you know what? We're talking about potential worst case scenarios, and Rodgers is the West Ham manager by the first week of September, and all this sort of stuff's happened. Could be fine. Could be absolutely fine. Could win the game on Tuesday. You sign the players, and you go on and you have a really successful season. But you shouldn't be gambling with it. You shouldn't be you shouldn't be putting your fans through it first and foremost, and you shouldn't be putting your manager through it, and the pressure on the players, etc. And that all stems from the top. So something has to change.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to leave it. And as you say, Stuart, I don't think no matter what happens, even if it gets 10 times better, you need to keep your eyes on the prize, and change is needed. I think people often say that the biggest threat to Celtic is Celtic themselves, but it's the Celtic board that is the biggest threat to Celtic, who could do more damage to us than any rival, and include European giants who probably will, if we do qualify, take 7 or 8 off us. That they don't do as much damage as the Celtic board, and it's time for Michael Nicholson, Peter Lawwell, Dermot Desmond. All of them have to go, as far as I'm concerned, and soon. So this has been the Cynic Weekly. Thanks, Stu.
Thanks very much. Sorry. Hope everyone's all right.
Scott.
Yep, buzzing for Saturday now. Cheers for having me.
No worries. So this has been the Cynic Weekly with myself, Barry Gallagher, Stuart Duggan and Scott Fleming. Sack the board, and we'll see you through the week.